Three. Good to see you, my friend. Welcome back.
Good evening, Guy. That's your name.
So you've
I
been
have
you've
Guy. Yeah.
you've been since we've talked, you spent some time in Greece. In fact, I believe that you've sh shot all the lectures of your next course on Plato from
Yeah.
Greece.
Yes. I did something that I exhausted myself to a point where I'd done. So let's start with the good part.
Yeah.
I finally went to Greece, went to Athens and to Delphi. I was there for 7 days. I had never been to Greece, only in my mind and maybe in spirit.
Oh wow.
So I never had the opportunity to travel
Mhm.
there, even though you'd think, it's probably close from either Germany or the UK, but I never, for some reason, never happened. And so last year I decided when the world opened up again at some point that I could travel to Greece and record lectures.
Yeah.
Uh, so I did an entire course on Plato's Politeia there, and I also recorded a course on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. And for that one, I actually went to his. So I did two courses in 7 days plus all the travels,
My
driving to, and I didn't have a team, so all I had was my iPhones and my
yeah.
microphones,
Yeah.
and just the whole logistics of it. It's just now after in the aftermath of the lowdown, as it were. I I'm realizing. Obviously, I was completely exhausted for weeks afterwards and couldn't really, because
Yeah.
even just the build up to it, I had to find the perfect apartment with a view of the Acropolis. So I shot most of the lectures from
Yeah.
this terrace or quote unquote penthouse apartment
Yeah.
with a view of the Acropolis. But every time you have a dog barking or a car driving by, you just have to be quiet. You have to make sure there's no restaurant downstairs. Anyway,
Right.
so all the logistics
That's
were
nice.
taken
It's
care
like
of.
the being at the Platonic Academy, right? Like,
So yeah, I do need to so people need to sign up. I do need to start hiring people. Um, but no, it was actually it's such a, because you're so much more involved with by having to figure out all of these things, and then also writing the lectures. I think it made me more involved in a way, even with the course. I could have just stayed here and turned on the camera, and I have everything here that I need. There's a good camera, there's a good microphone, books.
yeah.
I don't really read those, but
Yes. Yes.
um,
Yes. Yes.
no, no, I
Right.
sometimes dabble in them. But I did, so I could have, but to be that involved with a course, and especially with the place, I think that opened something up that maybe would not, obviously would not have happened here, because it was in some way, it was like coming home.
Hmm.
I felt like I knew the place perfectly in and out. I never felt, I mean, Athens itself, modern day Athens is behemoth. It's a massive city.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
even just arriving there and seeing the physiognomy, the faces, of the Greeks was incredible. What they look like. Oh yes, of course, that's what they
Yeah.
look like, and they
Yeah.
always have.
Yeah.
It's-
Yes. Yeah.
they're very, they've got great hospitality, and yeah. And for the Aristotle course, actually, I went to his Lyceum, the site of his academy, of his Lyceum,
Oh, really?
and yeah. So you so I it's not very, there's not much to see. It's just some very it's just ruins uh of the buildings, but you can walk around it, and that of course is in the spirit of Aristotle, the peripatos, the
Yeah.
peri, right, the periphery, to walk around and discuss philosophy together. Isn't so I recorded a couple of lectures there, and then also went up to Delphi, where I recorded a couple of lectures. And Delphi was, um, incredible. I spent an entire day. I think they were about to kick me out because they said, why is he still here? But I got there as early as possible and left when they closed the the park of the Temple of Apollo and all the different temples that are there in the
Hmm.
stadium, etc. So it was an incredible time. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, just imagining just the I haven't been to Greece either, but just imagining, being around those temples and then just kind of imagining dwell it like what it must have been like to dwell there, right? Where
Yeah.
everything, the architecture, everything is structured by these what the Greeks were, well, like what's the ground of all of our current intelligibility, right? At some level, like just to be
Yeah.
having
Yeah.
everything just structuring your being, living there must have been really cool.
Yeah, and it showed me that anamnesis is real. The
Yeah,
remembering
yeah.
of so we think of memory as subjective and personal.
Hmm. Hmm.
You have your memories, and then maybe we talk about collective memory, which is just the amalgamation of all the subjective memories, and it's downloaded into us from television or the internet or Netflix or something else.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but there's a deeper layer of memory,
Yeah.
where there's something that you sometimes you come to a place and you feel right at home, even though you've never been there and you may not even have heard anything of it before. So I think that's when we tap or lean into that too. And for for uh, I think in philosophy, what we're basically always doing when we philosophize is to remember philosophy. We just we don't just, but we do remember what it means to philosophize. And in this sense, it begins anew all the time, right?
Yeah.
So there's this sense of wonder or initial perplexity,
Yeah.
um, which is why it's so good to teach outside the university, to be honest, because I think I've told you this story a couple of times before. One of the universities I taught at for years, many years ago, I used to ask students, "Why are you here?"
Mm.
And one of them once said, and this is first year students, first term, it's on Plato, and one of them once said to me, "Well, how is this relevant for the exam?
Mm. Mm.
Get to it, get
Mm.
get
Mm.
started. This
Mm.
is not, you know, get
Mm.
on with it, mate."
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
so the customer wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Uh, it was a bit different, to be honest, at Birkbeck because the people were older and they were already, they were maybe bankers or doctors or builders or construction workers or so. So they would come to university much older, in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. So
Mhm.
they would answer very differently to that question. For them, it was existential. There's why are you here? Is I've lost all sense of direction and orientation in my life. I thought, you know, I have a career and I get all and this is
Yeah.
it, and it's
Yeah.
left me void. So that's different with them. So that was actually quite different. But in general, outside now, we can just read a text without all that baggage, which is I have to get a degree and I have to do this in order to get the degree, and at least that kind of a mark or grade, so that in the end, I will be able to get a good job. Um, because for me, you don't even get a PDF certificate; you get nothing. So but
Yeah.
but we're always we can so philosophy, I would stress this, and also there's obviously, and then something else that comes with just scholarship, and I'm not innocent of that myself, is that you begin to be, and let's talk about myself, begin even more, uh so let's talk about myself. I think I also began to be and I'm still in the process of destructing that or getting rid of that, in a sense. I began to be, perhaps like a few others too, you're detached almost, or you're not really taking it all too seriously, or it's already obvious and clear what Plato is telling us, or what Heidegger says, or what Hegel says, and at the same time you're just quibbling about, you know, uh, certain terms.
Mhm.
Um, and that's not ultimately philosophy, as Plato himself points out. Fighting about terms is not, that can get you into a certain dialectic, but it cannot ultimately lead you to wisdom, or
Mhm.
the idea of the good. You
Yeah.
have to give up, as we know from the cave. You have to give up yourself. You have to give up your comfort. You have to give up
Yeah.
what you know and lose it, and actually be dragged up. It's not an act of will. There's something you're suffering through this movement
Yeah.
to the sun to see the light of day,
Yeah.
and also have to move back down into it again. So every time we genuinely try to begin to philosophize, it actually begins, I think, anew. We are again addressed by the very same question, or we're perplexed ultimately by the sheer facts, as it seems, that something is at all.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
something is at all.
Yeah. And in this case is like this is where we can maybe start to talk a little bit about like in contrast, we were talking about this earlier before I pressed the record button about this, the modern sense in the university of a teacher student relationship is one of
Yeah.
a a customer, right? The student's the customer, right? And the teacher's job is to always, produce for the customer and keep the customer happy. And
Yeah.
but this ancient sense, right, of the role of the teacher, for lack of a word, Socrates, right, or Plato, or uh, is is isn't it
Teacher is
isn't
perfectly fine. Yeah.
production, right? It isn't an exchange, right, of value or something. It's something else is going on there.
It's very different. Um, so the issue, and there, I mean, so I don't, I wonder what would have to happen, but that's for a different time to discuss further, perhaps, um, to rejuvenate the university. There's so many layers and issues that it's not just so there is, yes, so there's a customer shop assistant sort of, relationship between teacher and student. They and the professors have to deliver. If you're a young career academic, your entire existence depends upon the evaluations that you get from your students.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you will very often never challenge them.
Yeah.
You will just have to say, "Well, this is great stuff, guys."
Yeah.
Uh, because if you're first year, second year, you might get sacked if your student evaluations are really in the gutter. If they're really, just he's mean to me,
Yeah. Yeah.
because you didn't make your customers happy. That has happened, and it is also in your permanent record. It's just one of these Orwellian tools of control, um, that Deleuze and Foucault speak about also, by which the bureaucratic state ensures that basically you don't, there's nothing radical about what you say.
Yeah.
There's nothing and nothing. So it's so, I don't know what it is. There's something deadening about this. It's machinic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
There
it's
are
also
great people,
yeah.
and this is not. Go on,
Yeah, I
sorry,
was
go on.
gonna say this it seems also like that then the job of the teacher is one to deliver, which is really interesting, right? As
Yes,
if
and
yeah,
yeah, so exactly. So yeah, that's great. That gives me that reminds me of something that would have forgotten without you now. So which is that, there's a you have to get, this is one of the things that bothered me the most always was that you're supposed to present learning outcomes at the beginning of every seminar. And I mean, just listen to the language, a learning outcome. By the way, in the UK, um, the
Yeah.
standard term for how much you have to teach per term
Yeah.
is teaching load, which, and that to me sounds like, okay, well, it's a load. It's
Yeah.
a load you have to carry. It's a cross we have to bear, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But to give learning outcomes at the beginning of a seminar. So, you say, well, you will walk away having understood that
Mhm.
Plato's forms, blah, 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 mean this, that, and the other. You cannot, there's no guarantee what a student will walk away with.
Yeah.
What, for example, what happens in philosophy is, so I came to philosophy through Plato.
Mhm.
Um, I had I learned, so I went to a certain form of high school in Germany where you first learn Latin and then you take ancient Greek. So reading Plato from a very young age in Greek and translating it, one of the first texts was the Apology, um, then the Meno, the Gorgias, and of course the Republic or the Politeia. And in the Politeia, what struck me was that the cave describes 2,500 years ago our age of multimedia, where, if you're not familiar with the cave, anyone who's listening, you have people who literally sit down there in the cave looking at what we would call today a screen.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
screen, it's the wall of the cave, but there's shadows on the wall. To
Yeah.
quote that old song, shadow on the wall.
Yeah. Yes.
That's why are they not making songs like that anymore? Ask yourself that. Anyways, so that it hit me that there must be something going on in philosophy, that there's something being described here that gets to the let's say the mysteries of the world, of existence, of being. And it's not just random perplexing theories, as Bertrand Russell would put it, or something. No, but you cannot guarantee that when you read the cave with a student, that they will draw that conclusion or a similar conclusion or a conclusion of their own, that it opens something up to them about the world in which they live.
Yeah.
You cannot, that's no guarantee. And I remember teaching, for example, Kant, and how Kant's transcendental logic, we don't have to get into this, is the logic by which we fly airplanes and spaceships, as strange as this sounds, because it's a logic of control again, where we begin to be able to posit how the kerosene reacts in the engine of the airplane without the airplane ever flying. The same, obviously there's also test and trial and error, etc. But also, if you break it down to the logic, it comes down to positing beforehand how something has to appear. That's very different from the Greeks, by the way, how they would see it, or Heidegger, as you know.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
about letting something occur,
Yeah.
letting the things appear,
Yeah.
rather than forcing them to appear.
Yeah.
So, in some sense, what we do in university, and there are great people at
Yeah.
universities, there are wonderful colleges, liberal arts colleges in America, where it's quite different, but they also, the young people who go to these colleges, they have the same pressures as everyone else. They have to get a job afterwards.
Yeah.
So in some
Yeah.
sense, you could also say, education basically is lost and wasted on the young anyways.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
for that reason, it might be better to go to a technical school, get a good job, or become a teacher or something, and then at some point read the great texts. There are exceptions. There can be people who are very eager from a young age onwards and can grasp it conceptually, etc. But very often, people come to it later on in life,
Yeah.
as you know. Uh, so I think with so it's machinic in the sense that you have to, the degree is guaranteed. But what does degree mean? When you listen to the word degree, it means, but there's a degree of, it's not just a thing, it's a degree
Yeah.
of accomplishment, a
Yeah.
degree of understanding.
Yeah.
So, it should be the case that after 3 years of studying, the committee says, well, you don't have the degree because
Yeah.
there is no degree of accomplishment.
Yes. Yes.
Or
Yes.
but
Right.
everyone is guaranteed the degree. If you do the bare minimum, there's no one fails any longer at these universities. Because they shouldn't. So I have to get my window for a second.
Mhm.
Let fresh air in. So there's perhaps but then you have on the other hand of having to certify people,
Mm.
you have the entire baggage that comes with the machinations of certification.
Yeah.
The mechanization of, I remember this from reading essays and the way you're supposed to mark essays. So you mark essays in this way and you have to use those terms, and then it's this mark and you copy paste it in and then boom, it's marked.
Hmm.
So this is when AI came out, ChatGPT, whenever this was, last year or something. And someone wrote in the Atlantic that the college essay is now dead. I made a video and just said, well, the college essay has been dead for decades because
Yeah.
we're already making them write in a technical, machinic manner, anyways. There's
Yeah.
nothing that could emerge,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're not allowed to write in a poetic manner. They're not allowed to write a dialogue.
Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. Why not let them write? So they're working on Plato. Why not let them write a dialogue?
Hmm. Yeah.
That's not appropriate because it has to be in this way. It cannot be a dialogue. It cannot be a poem. And it has to be in this
Hmm.
format
Hmm.
that just appeared apparently. It
Yeah.
fell from the heavens, which is behind you, and then
Yeah.
that's how we always. That's the status quo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but and I've seen students, young, they come in and they're, oh, I'm so interested in accelerationism and all these weird things and that happens in philosophy. And within a year, they have to give up on that.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Either you have to have a split self,
Hmm.
because that's no, everything becomes obvious when you read Plato. Nothing is obvious because there's not just one Plato. There's not the Plato who's a great dialectical logician. There's also Plato the myth maker.
Yeah.
And there's not just Plato the metaphysician, there's also Plato the historian and
Yeah.
the relator of older myths. I mean, Plato literally probably invents, or at least relates to us and extends the myth of Atlantis.
Yeah.
I would say that the cave is also a myth. And myth does not mean lie as we now understand it, but
Yeah.
myth is a way of moralizing people, of making them aware of something through the image.
Yeah. Yeah.
That myth actually, Atlantis is a myth, so we shouldn't do what the empiricists do. Like, where is Atlantis? We have to run over here. This might be no. Atlantis is a principle of history,
Hmm.
which um which stands for commerce, relentless and endless trading. We would today say for capitalism, finance capitalism, etc. That's how it's described. It's described as a harbor that never stands still, that's always open 24/7, ships coming in and out. And in opposition to that is Athens, which is grounding itself in scolaire, in, to keep it simple for listeners, in leisure or in
Yeah.
sufficiency.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so those two are just these two ideas, we could say.
Yeah.
They are it's not, is he just fetishizing or idealizing Athens? Because no, he's looking at two different principles or ideas
Yeah.
of how to build a polis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Atlantis then symbolically sinks because it lacks this ground of sufficiency. You see,
Yeah.
that's why it disappears.
Yeah. 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 And it's an interesting, it's an interesting thing that it's paradoxical in that the ground of sufficiency, the word ground can be misleading, right? Of whereas in some sense, I get this way in which in Skole, on one level, right, we are, to put it in different language, right, it's a way of being in time where that the way I relate to time in turn
Yeah,
holds me, right? Where it's, and another way of putting that
yeah,
is where I'm relating to things as ends in themselves, not as means to ends to something else. And that in some sense holds me. But that sense
yeah,
of an end, usually people think about the end of like, but that's also ends are also beginnings, right? In the horizontal sense of the word. It's like I got this sense of the way that Aristotle talks about friendship as you know, essentially like communing in, you know, you relate, if we're friends, I relate to you not as means, right, but for
Yeah.
its own
And
sake. But that sense of that
yeah, and
the end is where you
go on.
peer at the limit, and then peer,
Yeah.
right? We're peers, and then we can start to look out towards what is ineffable, what is beyond our immediate grasp. And that tension, or that tautness, right, of in some sense abiding within the paradoxical, abiding within the non-calculatable, right, abiding within this ineffable sense, is somehow something that is sustaining to, you know, in this case, Athens as compared to Atlantis.
Yeah. And despite its riches and its wealth, it's so in the more mythological story, it's Atlantis is punished ultimately by the gods.
Mhm.
But uh, so there is a certain punishment for failure to build your polis on Scolaire. And in Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, which I so that's for a different time perhaps to discuss, but which I don't think is a work on so-called virtue ethics. Uh, that's one of the other things, just in general, how we approach these texts. Maybe briefly, is we have preconceived notions and translations
Yeah,
that make sense for us today, but we need to look at the Greek. We can't maybe translate everything anew, but some of the words just don't make sense. I'll get to this back to this in a second. But Aristotle also mentions towards the end of the Nicomachean Ethics, um, when again, I think the book is ultimately about how philosophical friendship is necessary for the polis. So you see, we would consider priests or professors as basically some sort of entertainers. You know, a professor entertains the students during
yeah,
the day,
yeah.
and teachers are the same. You know, teachers they take care of your kid during the day, and then at the end maybe you learn a bit of calculus and how to write your name and you know how
Mhm.
to behave
Yeah,
in the classroom.
yeah,
But what if, as strange as this sounds to us, what if those weirdos, you know, in Aristotle's Lyceum, as they just walk around and talk about what friendship is, what arete is, arete, which we so
yeah,
poorly translate as virtue, what aletheia is, truth, what is the good. Maybe this speaking and walking actually also helps to sustain the polis,
yeah,
right? It translates because if I don't want to get too pragmatic here, but this does translate into how the city also, as an ethos, holds itself.
yeah,
Um, and an ethos, by the way, means character. Yes, all of this and the different spellings of it. There's one with an eta and one with an epsilon. But ethos we can also again translate as the dwelling ground um, of human beings,
yeah,
or and hence also, by the way, as essence, or really as Wesen in this German sense of realm. So
yeah,
ethos is the realm in which we live together, and the question is, how do we live together well? And
yeah,
to this end, Aristotle suggests that philosophical friendship, which is the highest form of friendship,
yeah,
is absolutely fundamental. So you
yeah,
need philosophical friends
yeah,
in a polis to maintain the polis, and this is something that cannot be mechanized. You know, you cannot produce you can produce philosophical scholars who
yeah,
can produce papers and who can produce talks that critique re-critique and rehash critiques, etc., and know everything and have all the footnotes too. But you cannot produce that. This is something that comes about through a different kind of uh, training and education and interaction between teacher and learner.
yeah,
Um, and what was the other thing? Uh, I think I forgot. There was
yeah.
something else. Oh, the words, the language. Sorry. Um, But- So when we look, so what I will stress at the course on Plato is on the Politeia. Obviously, the book is about the question for, as we translate the word, justice.
Mhm.
Right? That's how it begins, and that's sort of that's not the only issue, but that's the opening question, and it's the question that does sustain most of the text.
Mm.
But when we hear the word justice, we have very different connotations and associations than what maybe Plato would have had with dikaiosune. So once we get to the how is it justice that there are three different castes, and how is it because we think of justice as equal opportunity, for example, perhaps right, or equal access, or even equal outcome. Um, well, how what is the theory of soul? How do your the different parts of your soul, the logos and thumos, etc. How do those how must they be kept in balance? What would that have to do with justice?
Yeah.
Well, another term perhaps for dikaiosune, that's not a literal translation. So this is not, so when Heidegger translates, for example, aletheia as unconcealment, that's a literal translation.
Yeah.
Dikaiosune would translate to perhaps as Aristotle himself points out, as something being split or so, or divided. But I will, so in the course, we'll think of it, especially in the beginning, as appropriateness.
Mm.
So what is it? Where do you, what is your appropriate role? How do you order the parts of your soul so
Yeah.
that they are in an appropriate order,
Yeah.
appropriate to its end.
Yeah.
And right, so
Yeah.
this is how we will think of dikaiosune for most, and then all of a sudden justice will begin to take on a very different meaning.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Justice starts to probably become something that just literally starts to appropriate, right? The conversation itself. Yeah.
yeah, so there is in a sense of so there is appropriation. Um, and but maybe another word would be what's proper to, so what is
Yeah.
the proper order
Yeah.
within your soul, but also the proper order of the polis, and that is what makes it not an ideal city. He never, of course, uses the word ideal. It doesn't exist. He
Yeah.
speaks of a Kallipolis, a beautiful city, and it's beautiful because through it shines the idea of the good. So
Yeah.
the idea of the good is right there in front of us.
Yeah.
It's not somewhere in another world. That's another misconception about Plato. Uh, is the two-world paradigm. As we shall see, uh, the forms are, or the ideas, they're right there with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's precisely when something really comes, it's, let's say someone really comes into his or her own, when you realize that there's something coming out of
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
that that's when it's all just coming together, and the whole just begins to shine forth, and that's when we can see that moment of truth, and that's when it's not just the character of someone, there's something else going on. The same is true for a place. If you have a place that's totally destroyed by just terrible city planning, etc.,
Mm.
then you can't really recognize it anymore.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but so we do. So there is, but so maybe a better translation for eidos is not very. So eidos is usually form or idea, but maybe it's just concept.
Yeah.
And concept is, so there are issues in Plato. We don't have to get into this. It's like there's he doesn't just. By the way, just for anyone, because I know many people who come to you, they also read Heidegger. So the reason why people like Humboldt and Hegel, and especially then Heidegger, will focus so much on language is because this is neglected
Yeah.
in Plato and in Aristotle and going forward. So
Yeah.
language is really is becomes the medium in which we get in touch with the form,
Yeah.
and through, so but it needs the appearance, right?
Yeah.
So something needs to appear so that through the concept it can fully appear, but it
Yeah.
also appears of its own accord, and as it appears of its own accord, the concept co-forms this appearance.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's an interrelationship between
Yeah.
between nous, between the mind
Yeah.
and the idea.
Yeah.
And by the way, just just to hammer this home, as you know, because you have read Heidegger many
Mhm.
times, on the first paragraph, in the first paragraph of Being in Time, he speaks of the gigantomachia perithesousias, the gigantic battle for being.
Mm,
This is a quote from Plato's Sophist.
mm,
And this, so what is this gigantic battle of being? It's striking that Plato already foresees the battle that we've now come to call between realism, that's to say things come first, or objects come first,
mm, mm,
and idealism, which is to say the mind comes first.
mm,
So Plato already very much sees this as a possibility, and I think his philosophy is ultimately one that unifies
yeah.
mind and matter, if you want to put it in those crude terms, but that
Yeah.
unifies what is actual and what is coming through in actuality and in appearance, and also what the mind contributes to it. The mind, we always contribute to our, so what we, for Heidegger, it's more the hands and it's in language, etc. But there is also, we shouldn't forget mind and spirit uh,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
always co-form, co-structure how something appears.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's never purely, there's nothing purely independent, but there's also nothing purely subjective, as it
Yeah.
were. It's
This co, this co. It's funny. So that was one of the things the gestalt of almost everything that you were saying. I was just really struck
yeah,
a lot by, man, the thing that seems constant right through everything, the way that you're describing, is this coming into relation, finding oneself already in a relation, coming into a relation. It's like, it's so relational. Like everything is kind of pointing to beyond itself, in itself, over itself, through itself.
yes,
This
yeah.
this relate this I don't know how else to put it. Gathering this gathering into gathering into relation from a relation.
Well, well,
Mhm.
now you know why Heidegger retranslated logos as gathering, right? So it's
Yeah,
even though
yeah,
language is so crucial, it's even, of course, again pre-linguistic,
yeah,
also drawing us in also outside of language.
yeah,
Um, and uh, so I'm not saying that. So there are tendencies in Plato that can lead to the two-world paradigm, which is very clear cut. But whenever you have in philosophy something that's too schematic, where it's just everything makes too much sense, right? It's
yes,
all too obvious. When I just say to you,
yeah,
well, here's the world of ideas,
yeah,
friend, and
yeah,
they are eternal and they're real, but everything down here is basically unreal because it's in flux. That's
yeah,
so schematic as a model.
yeah,
It's so obvious. I mean, it's not obvious to anyone on the street. They would still, get the guys with the
yeah,
weird jacket and
yeah.
send you off because you're insane. But it's basically the matrix model,
It conceals.
between the real and the virtual.
Yeah,
It's very clear cut.
yeah, yeah,
Which, by the way, is why Jean Baudrillard really detested the Matrix film, is
right.
because they did not understand that there's
Yeah,
always a suffusion or a diffusion between the two.
yeah,
And it's just that in our time, we
yeah,
we we are no longer playfully able to distinguish between real and illusory, between seeming and being, and also play with this. So
yeah,
there's a strange thing is about postmodernity is that we don't believe in the real, but we want the real. So it
yeah,
has to be like even better than the real thing, right? It has to be hyper real. It has to be so real that when you see it, it's so sharp, like the graphics are so sharp,
yeah,
it doesn't look real anymore.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
bizarre situation in which we are.
yeah,
Because think about it in this way. The relationship between seeming and being, or illusion and reality, that's one of the fundamental questions of philosophy also. But
yeah,
it's not to say this is the illusion, this is reality. You
yeah.
you are in the cave and you're lost, but you go outside the cave and you're free and you're enlightened. It's a bit more difficult.
Yeah, in
Let's
fact,
say, you know, let-
that's the mystery or wonder of it is the realization of them interpenetrating each other in some way that like
And
one finds
also
super satisfying.
lapsing back and forth.
Yeah,
I mean, how often do you wake up and think, "Who am I?"
yeah,
um,
yeah,
or if you have a bit of, higher self. I'm observing this about myself at the moment. I'm just, oh, this is strange. I would never have thought of that 20 years ago.
yeah, yeah,
Why not entertain this thought or this idea?
yeah,
Uh, and you notice this. So, and analytical philosophers, they go insane with, oh my God, am I still the same person?
yeah,
This is T1 and now it's T2. This is what they mean by time
yeah,
stamps. I can't be the same. I have to be. It's totally schizophrenic. I mean, there's obviously there can be development and you can change and you can observe the change
yeah,
because you can take on different. And you can also just fall into a mere seeming of yourself, or you can also live through a certain lie, as Nietzsche points out, right?
yeah,
I mean, the American saying always never misses, fake it till you make it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, yes.
But okay, to give a concrete example, and I have this example from my friend Max Gottschalk, who is was a very good Platonist and Hegelian. So his example is this: let's imagine you're an actor, and you're a layman actor, but or maybe you're a professional, doesn't matter, and you go and you accept a role where you, even though you're married, you have to on stage or on film uh, make out and kiss and fall in love with your colleague,
Mhm,
right? An actress, an actor, doesn't matter. So it could just happen that over the time of rehearsing and filming or being on stage, by putting on this play for weeks, even months, perhaps,
mhm.
that you all of a sudden fall in love with that person. You begin to realize there is an attraction. And it need not only be sexual attraction, that can play into this also. But you get very close to someone you shouldn't get close to,
Yes, yes.
and all erotic, and especially because there's an element of eroticism here, right? Which is, you're not really supposed to do this. So there are all these layers, and that makes it, of course, even more tempting and seductive, the entire situation. So you might actually find yourself being drawn to this person, falling in love. So the mere illusion has become your life. It has become real.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the same can happen in the reverse. You can be married to someone, it's the big romance, wonderful, and all of a sudden you realize something is off.
Yeah,
What was or what has been no longer holds any sway over this relationship.
yeah, yeah.
It's you look at the other person, you think, there's this great film about Schmidt with what's his face, Jack Nicholson,
Uh-huh.
when he so he yeah, he's a company man. He retires and he doesn't know who he is. He had these big dreams about making it big at the corporation. Nothing has come to pass. He leaves the company, and within a week, he's forgotten. No one cares about Schmidt anymore.
Hmm.
And then he lies in bed one night and looks over to his wife and says, "Lately, I've been wondering who's this old lady lying next to me in bed." So, the,
Yeah, yeah,
and this may have been different before, but it's disappeared. It has evaporated. It
yeah,
has fallen into, at best, an illusion, the mere seeming appearance of a relationship or of a marriage, and it no longer is one.
yeah,
So, and Plato is not opposed to these shifts at all.
yeah,
I think quite the opposite, and I think that the
yeah.
cave very much signifies this.
It
You have
draws,
to
actually
move
draws
out.
you into it. Yeah, into these
Yeah,
shifts. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, into those shifts. And it's something. It's some. There's something too when to go back a little bit on something when you were talking about like these moments where
yeah,
you said something. So you see someone start to come into their own, right?
yeah,
Like this kind of kind of something gathers, and all of a sudden one starts to, you can see someone like say something that's like originally them or unique or particular, that in some sense it's like brand new, and in another sense it's got a sense of they've always
It's not, yes,
been.
it's new and it's old. It's,
Yeah,
that's you. It's
yeah,
so we are, as Nietzsche would put it, we are becoming who we are. But he continues, but that means you have no idea who you are.
yeah, yeah.
And the
And that
cave is quite similar.
that
You don't
that
know what expects
paradox.
you outside. You don't even know there is an outside.
Yeah. That
But
and
you
that.
also don't know what expects you when you return into the cave because you've never seen the cave coming in
Hmm.
back again. You don't know the cave, even though you've known it all your life.
Yeah.
If all the Yeah.
And that would be something like enduring a memory, right? It's something you go, as you talk about memory, something you go through, right? This
Yeah.
kind of coming
And,
back
and
into the cave, right? In some sense of you remember the cave, but but it stands out in ways that are just radically different, in ways that never occurred to you. But
yeah,
at some level, you think back to that time, right? And that thinking back is brand new as well. I've always noticed that with personal insights about myself. It's usually some sense of it's not a brand new thing. It's like I recognize something that's, oh my God, I've always been doing blah 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 blah. And now I realize I was really doing da 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 da. And then there's like a moment of like suspension, and then I start going back through my life, and my mind kind of does this. I like get a new history where I remember my life knowing this, and I realize it was obvious the whole time, but I didn't. It was undistinct, right? So you get these new
yeah,
histories, right? With just like
yeah.
a
Your future rewrites, in some sense, the past,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
that's constantly happening. If it So the past is not dead.
yeah.
It's I don't like I don't really chaos theory, but everyone knows it, so I use it as an analogy or as a metaphor. A butterfly in Brazil uh, can cause a hurricane in Florida or God knows what.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but as an analogy, anything that happens or that has been thought even can and may in ways that we don't can never fathom
Hmm.
uh, exercise something in the world.
Hmm. Hmm.
Either it can be in your personal life, but also, of course, in the grander scheme of things of what occurs in this realm in which we dwell.
Hmm.
Nietzsche has this beautiful quote in the Zarathustra that thoughts that come on dove's feet guide the world. And of course, also, that we're not just beings of rationality, but there are also beings of madness, etc. And by the way, Plato would not be at all opposed to notions of madness. He speaks of divine madness, theomania, for example. Again, this is the whitewashed 19th century Plato does not exist. There's a bit more going on, but in general, perhaps we cannot fathom what is ultimately structuring everything that surrounds us. But at the same time, how we begin
Yes.
to look ahead into the future
Yeah,
recasts a shadow
yeah,
uh, on this screen or the horizon of the past also, that
yeah,
then begins to revert in a way that, oh yes, now it makes sense,
yeah,
this is what this meant.
yeah,
And that then, however, sends off shockwaves again in the other direction, if you want to make it all too
yeah,
schematic for reasons of
yeah,
illustrating this. And that generates a new presence.
yeah.
And this is constantly happening. I think one of the things, we don't have to get into anything in particular, but overall, I think we're living through a time where there's so many of these weird shifts in all directions
I was gonna
that we're
say,
basically in a constant tsunami of waves of, and as you know, so I've not in academia, because then they would have called the they wouldn't have let me publish the book. But I translate Heidegger's Seinsgeschichte, the history of being. What a boring translation. The history of being. It's just all these ways in which we understood being in the past. and everyone's falling asleep. Well,
Mhm.
no, it's tidal waves, and
Yeah.
they're literally crashing down on us.
Yeah.
Um, because all these different interpretations are working. Because right now you have the collapse of the great religions to a certain degree, but you also have of the Abrahamic religions, but you also have a sort of um, as they die, perhaps they get more extreme. Um, at
Mm.
least those who genuinely believe. Christianity is basically gone at this point. It's not really that relevant, but there's a huge move towards traditional Catholicism, etc. So but it's all at once at the same time. And also Europe, of course, never had to deal with. We were in Europe. We were.
Yeah.
This is it. We're
Yeah.
the universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now everything is everywhere all at once.
Yeah.
Um, and we have to deal with all of these different tidal waves coming in from all kinds of other directions:
Yeah.
China, India, Russia, Africa,
Yeah.
uh, um, and whatever America is, right? As beautiful as it is,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And Goethe said, America, you have it better
Yeah.
because you're free, you're ahistorical, you're free from all this baggage. But it turns out, that brings its other um, uh, dangers with it.
Mhm.
But but the and also, of course, the great freedom that you have. That
Mhm.
I mean, not I don't mean the political freedom, but there's something about the American spirit that is just, oh yeah, it's all just just one big horizon. It's just
Mhm.
go.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
endless.
Yeah.
I could go
Totally.
there. And so, but this is all now occurring, and I think at once these weird waves, things collapsing, but also getting more extreme as they collapse, and a great void at the same time also, that we don't really have an answer to yet. So I would venture that what needs to be done is a certain groundwork
Yeah.
where we cannot take for granted. We cannot just say, well, here's Platonism. This solves all the problems.
Mhm.
No, because it doesn't. Because it's simply it just ultimately, if you just start, you reboot the system, you're going to
Mhm.
you're going to come to a similar conclusion in the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are reasons why Plato is not a Platonist. That's the first thing to know. But also that once it gets reified, it's Platonism, and mystified by Plotinus, etc., and then with the early Christians, that it becomes also, again, not machinic, that would be the wrong word, but too narrow. So the groundwork, I think, has to be to go back to the source. That's the act of bracketing, ultimately, the phenomenological approach to a certain degree.
Mhm.
But it is then a different approach from just Husserlian and Heideggerian bracketing or destructing, in the
Mhm.
sense that what's being laid bare constantly is this
Bare.
deep. Sorry.
Laying bare. So not a
Yeah, is
bracketing
this.
or destructing, but a laying bare.
Yeah, and it is genuinely a deep memory. I think that what we're living through is is such an explosion of 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 phenomena, of things becoming apparent.
Yeah.
What is Christianity?
Yeah.
Why does it spread so far?
Explosion of
Um,
things becoming apparent. Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, there seems to be just no, I'm not. This is not. It's not the Great Awakening or It's not. So in some sense, it is apocalyptic. Um, because apocalypse just means revealing, but not in the sense of a new revealed religion. But you, at this point, you cannot be a universalist. You want. I don't think you can be
Yeah.
uh, any sort of Christian or whatever
Yeah.
universalist, for example, or a Hegelian universalist, thinking that the Chinese approach the world in the same way that we do. No,
Yeah.
they just
Yeah.
obviously not the case.
Yeah.
And but then the strange thing is, oh, how can there be dialogue? And I think there can be,
Yeah.
to a but there can be these meeting places.
Yeah.
But this happens through
Yeah.
through analogy, through, for example, analogizing, through bringing the different ways of making sense together,
Yeah.
and always, I think there is a connection through memory again.
Yeah.
But first, we have to remember in the Occident, in Europe, in America, etc. What is it that first grounds us, and
Yeah.
and then we can discuss again,
Yeah.
maybe with with the rest. Because the if not, then it's just one big shopping mall of oblivion,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah. Yeah.
where I laugh
Yeah.
so as not to cry,
Yeah.
um, as it were.
Yeah. I laugh as to not to cry. Yeah. Yeah. This, in some sense, this kind of exploding into appearance, right? That you're talking about. Like, yeah, I could get a real sense of what you're describing. You're right. In some way that's not it's not like reducible to like the internet or technology, but in some sense, whatever it is that affords something like an internet to then have
Okay. Yes.
like
Yeah.
all this stuff
So
available at
that's very
once,
good.
right? Yeah.
So to anyone listening, what Guy just pointed out is very important, because it could sound as though the internet um, enables this,
Mhm.
but it is what you say is the other way around.
Yeah.
There's something
Yeah.
already in place or
Yeah.
working itself out that then factors into the coming about of the internet, and
Yeah.
also the acceptance of the internet.
Yeah. 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 In some sense,
And
the
the
internet is
acceptance that we
fallen,
have
almost
of,
fallenness from it or out of it. Yeah. Yeah. In some way. Yeah.
and also just the strange seamless, not so seamless, but apparently, I mean, think back just the past decade.
Yeah.
This is something that I pondered all of last year,
Yeah.
is how did I end up doing this weird online philosophy stuff?
Mm.
What's wrong with me? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
just have, be like every other young academic, have a Twitter account, post how proud you are of your new publication in a paper, get slapped on the, get slapped on the back. What's the expression? Um, get a pat on the back, I guess. Sorry, but slapped on the back would be a bit. Kid. But
Mm.
and but we, I'm I'm now 39, and I'm part of the first generation really to use social media.
Mhm.
I had MySpace,
Mhm.
and then Facebook, then I guess Instagram, Twitter, and then YouTube. Um, and there can be moments of disassociation. This is why I always say never build a brand,
Mhm.
because the brand is a golem that will get away from you,
Mhm.
and it will eat you alive, like all golems ultimately do. So don't build a brand. Don't think of yourself as the brand, because I think the branding stuff, all of that leads to just disassociation, which is ultimately uh, schizophrenic. So you have to be, there's something odd about the fact that this is being recorded and then it goes out there, and then these two talking heads are up there. Not forever. The internet is not forever. That's definitely not what's
Mhm.
happening.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
I mean, look, try
Fileable,
and find.
right?
Huh?
But they are fileable, right?
Yeah, it's fileable, but but I think the effort to keep all of this active is the energy requirement and the filing. I mean, at some point, the internet might be just also unusable.
Mhm.
God, or they just have to reset a few things and get rid of data from 20 years ago,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it's just too much. It's just completely overflowing with data no one needs.
Mhm.
I don't, that's another issue of our time, is that we are basically rarefying platonic formats into data,
Mhm.
and think that if we only have enough data,
Yeah.
then we can find reality.
Yeah.
You see how this works?
Yeah.
We rarefy platonic forms into
Yeah.
formats,
Yeah.
and then turn it into data that we can objectively find, that will then lead us to objective reality. And the fact is, no, the sciences are in a crisis.
Mhm.
Um, the replication crisis, so called,
Mhm.
and we don't see the world for all the data.
Yeah.
Uh, but at the
Yeah.
same time, so to come back to what you actually said, there's an enabling already that it even allows us to do this. And of course, it comes with all kinds of other nonsense that no one needs. I mean, the internet. But still, it seems that there, there could be um, a way of find. I'm not sure how to put it because I don't want this to sound like the great revealing, or because that's not what it is. It's not a great revealing or anything.
Mhm.
Um, it's sort of it could also just be a big sobering up in some sense. We
Mhm.
look soberly because we also have to deal with, for some reason, we have to deal with all this history.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just look back on thousands
Yeah.
of years, and
Yeah.
the question is always, how do we relate to it? When last year Netflix published this documentary, Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you saw this, which was basically on, yes, Atlantis was real and this might have been it. One of these empiricists trying to find
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
civilization before civilization.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, what if you find it? That
Mhm.
doesn't change anything. It
Mhm.
literally changes nothing. Because if once you establish, yes, there was civilization that many thousands, tens of thousands of years ago,
Mhm.
it precedes ours, there will be one guy standing up the minute this is published and he will say, but what about the civilization before that
Yeah.
civilization?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And it goes back ad infinitum.
Yeah.
So that doesn't give us a ground. You see how this is exploding backwards into infinity, into a void,
Oh,
into an
interesting.
abyss that we
Yeah.
cannot find. It's
Yeah,
not.
you're right.
So we
In some
need.
sense, that seeking to find it, right, is in some sense a seeking of a ground, right?
It's
That
a, yes, exactly.
uncreated.
It's a
Yeah.
seeking of a foundation, foundation of a ground that in Heidegger, by the way, is all about grounding, right?
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
opposed to a substance from which the world emanates.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but if you read the contributions, the Beiträge zur Philosophie, one of the main fugues, one of the main parts is Gründung, grounding. It's
Yeah.
all about founding, and Gründung can also mean, by the way, to found.
Yeah.
So we need to be able to found in the relationship with the tradition,
Yeah.
so that it speaks to us. We need to find ways in which Plato speaks to us, to be
Yeah.
participants in it,
Yeah.
rather
i.e.,
than just
the concept, right, comes in relationship with the form. They
yeah.
come into
Oh,
appearance. Yes.
so yeah, so you see, one of the things that happens, for example, in Europe in the 18th and 19th century in France,
Yeah.
uh, is is that there's a great interest in Roman theater, in plays from the olden Roman days, and what the French do at the time is they replicate the form and the content in such a rigid manner that it's just bizarre to it's just a complete reenactment of a Roman play.
Mm.
But when you look at, for example, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar,
Mm.
that's not it's not a reenactment of the historically accurate Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
It is a play of it somehow brings together Julius Caesar and modern man.
Yeah.
And what shines through in between is the purely human.
Mhm.
There's something human that comes through as these
Mm.
Caesarian figures unify in one, in Julius Caesar,
Mhm.
who begins to be also a modern political figure and leader, etc. So
Mm.
there's a lively dialogue,
Yeah.
and the attempt of the historicists, of people like Herder and Wilhelm von Humboldt, and later on Heidegger, etc., is always to find Heidegger's not a historicist, just to
Yeah.
make this
Yeah.
clear, but it has different approach, but still similar. Is to how can we give form, new form, cast in new form the content of old, so
Yeah.
that it's alive, we participate in it, it speaks to us,
Yeah.
and maybe it even speaks to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a unifying thread, as you know.
Yeah.
What does he always call it, Viveki? John,
Oh
our good
yeah.
friend, the through.
The through line.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That sense of, yeah, because there's it's, and I mean, I think the thing I mean, the dialogues, right, are, I think, are just example after example after example
yeah,
this sense where, yeah, something starts to, as you say, come into its own. Yet that very coming into its own, right? Also, there's something that draws you in and withdrawals, right? Into
yeah,
some kind of mystery, and this kind of minding. I can even hear it in the way that we're talking about this different sense of history and tradition.
yeah,
In some sense, you're minding that through line of that very withdrawal, that as it
yeah.
comes, as it appears. But in no place is there the thing that you can optimize and like make an app out of, and like there's it's this.
Well, but look, but
Yeah,
but in a way, the metaverse is trying to do just that. It's
yeah,
trying to copy the past. So one of the things,
yeah,
computer games are a great example of this. You don't need the metaverse. Computer games where you can pretend to be a knight,
yeah.
or I don't know, whatever,
And if you
or a
record yourself,
cowboy.
you can like have a million other people just watch you play your game.
I should do that, shouldn't
Yeah,
I?
that's what they do. I mean, that's most of YouTube,
But you
right?
know what? The problem with that is I'm so bad at computer games. It would just be a constant fail.
Yeah,
So what do I do next? Where's the major cheat here?
yeah,
What
yeah,
do you have to do here? I don't know. Any computer game I played, I got stuck, and oh god, I can't find it. Oh, and I had to ask other people because back then, there was no internet, so I couldn't find the solution.
yeah, yeah,
What do you have to do now? Why is this so complicated?
yeah,
How can
yeah,
I put this on easy?
yeah,
So this would be just one big embarrassing. Uh, yeah, maybe I should do under a different name, perhaps. I wouldn't even know how to. That's the next thing. How do you stream a computer game? I don't know. Took me long enough to get this thing going.
yeah,
You know.
totally, totally, yeah, yeah. Well, you know,
Zoom is changing so much. I don't know how to use it anymore. There's all these things, when you do
I
this,
know there's
it
new
shows
buttons
the
on it
thumb
every
up
time, and
sign.
like,
This,
yeah,
how are you? Stop doing this. How do you turn this off?
yeah,
But yeah, but no. So the yeah, there is exactly if because what an app or what a computer system in that sense tries to do is, but what do you mean by app? Obviously, is sort of again a mechanization, an automation of this,
mhm,
but it tries to cast something into timelessness that is itself not timeless. So
yeah,
even let's just say there can be quote unquote timeless ideas,
yeah,
timeless notions of what something means.
yeah,
They will always be, they will always play themselves out again
mhm,
in a temporal manner. They
yeah,
have to, because we are temporal beings.
yeah, yeah,
Even if you believe that time is an illusion,
yeah,
it's still an illusion by which you have to act. Because if you say time is just an illusion and you drop your new phone on the paveway and it breaks,
mhm,
well, go back in time. If it's just
yeah,
an illusion,
yeah, yeah,
but you can't for some
yeah,
reason. We cannot go back in
yes,
that manner. But in
yeah,
some other manner, we actually can go back. And that's in this
yeah,
other sphere of the
yeah,
realm, which is again how we connect to what is the past, or else they just become shells of something that means nothing. I mean, in some sense, the tragedy is, of course, of a place like the Acropolis in Athens and of
mhm,
the temples in Delphi, um, is that they are now ruins, and they're ruins for tourists um, to be seen, but they're no longer places of worship, which is what they were.
yeah, yeah,
But we also have to maybe begin to wonder,
yeah,
how do we relate to such places of worship? And this could be the Acropolis, this could be a temple, and a Mayan temple, and
yeah,
uh, or even the even I went to Luxor last year.
Yeah.
No, 2 years ago. No, God damn it, I'm getting old. I keep forgetting. Anyways, this is 2 years ago. So I went to Luxor, and I wonder, is this what it should be? These old graves in the mountain, is for me and other tourists now to see 3,000 years old, looking like
Take
time actually does not exist,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
or or can we not, because we relate to these,
Mm,
even if we have all the greatest knowledge about these places.
mm,
The question is always, does this knowledge translate into anything?
yeah,
Does it actually have any meaning to our lives, except for being being
yeah,
educated about something?
yeah,
But
yeah,
and about our lives does not mean, yeah, it can give you personal pleasure,
yeah,
etc.
yeah,
But if we maybe begin to be able to fathom
yeah,
that history keeps playing itself out, and
yeah,
that it's the events of history, but it's also what could have happened and what didn't happen. The
yeah,
possibility, as we've
yeah,
talked plenty of times about possibility,
yeah, yeah,
the, what could have happened remains a haunting impossibility, if you like to speak a bit like Derrida.
yeah,
It's not just, it doesn't just disappear. And you know this because this is why people have in their personal lives, this is why we have regrets.
yeah,
Is because
yeah,
something lingers on.
yeah,
But now think about this on a vast scale of
yeah,
billions of lives, but also just history or the universe playing itself out.
yeah,
And it becomes unfathomable.
yeah,
So
yeah,
perhaps that could open up a path to, because when I was in Egypt and Luxor, I just thought, this is what is going on. The Nile is this massive stream that gives life, but you can also just, you jump in, you die because there's alligators and the
yeah,
stream's just too
yeah,
fast.
yeah,
And right next to it is just sheer death.
yeah,
That desert in August is just death.
yeah,
It's white. The sun burns you within 5 minutes.
yeah,
And what? And also, I drove through the desert to get to Luxor. And you see these massive rocks in the desert. And
yeah,
they look like, so all these figures that you see of the, I don't, because I'm not great with these things, but the sphinxes with the dog face or whatnot,
yeah,
they
yeah,
look like these rocks. They
yeah,
just came out of those rocks. They were there. They
yeah.
just needed to get them out of those rocks. They were already there. These
Right, right,
so,
right.
so I just wonder, where are
Yeah,
our rocks and where are our gods? Where is this?
yeah,
When are we bringing? We could, as Nietzsche says, we birth a new star. Maybe we should be able to birth new gods, or I don't know, or be midwives to the birth of new gods. That's a bit spooky, perhaps, but
right, right.
that's
It
why not?
seems like it
Huh?
has something to do with this whole like holding oneself in this unfathomableness, this place where everything looks so weird, right? And
And
strange.
yeah, but at the same time, you also come home in a sense, right?
Yeah,
Because once the cosmos is ensouled again,
yeah,
and it's not just a vast empty space that just keeps on expanding. For why? Why is it expanding? What is it expanding into?
yeah, yeah,
And all
yeah,
the science bros will say, "Oh, he's anti-science. Look at it.
yeah.
It's non-scientific." Well, so okay, maybe it is, but it's just deeply nihilistic.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, and the cosmos can be ensouled. There can be strangeness there, but you also feel. And by the way, the more you travel, the sky in America looks different from the sky in Bavaria. But the sky, by the way, I'm from Bavaria. The sky in Athens is quite similar to the sky in Bavaria.
Hmm.
And people don't know this, but Bavaria, Bayern, reimagined itself in the 19th century as
Hmm.
Hellas. So it
Hmm.
changed its colors to blue and white. And Bavaria was a reimagination of Athena.
Hmm.
So when people go to the Oktoberfest, the only thing that anyone knows about Bavaria is Oktoberfest, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, there's a massive statue, huge, I don't know, 20 meters high, uh, of Athena,
No
of
kidding. Wow.
Yes, in
Wow.
front of a pantheon
Wow.
of accomplished. So these reimaginations, they can occur,
Yeah.
but for some reason, we just either have these crudely dystopian visions of the future,
Yeah.
and they are the same to some, and to others the same dystopian visions are no, that's actually utopia. Okay, when we
Yeah.
have full on automation and everything, actually that's my utopia. And so, but I think there's something else that's lacking that we're
Yeah.
not bringing to the fore, and it's because it's either utopian or dystopian. It's never or nostalgic.
Yeah.
um yeah, so that's
Yeah.
also so, yeah. But part of it perhaps is to do with how we reintegrate learning into our lives, how we
Yeah.
rethink learning and reading a book and what it means to read with others, and
Yeah.
that is not just something you do when you're young
Yeah.
and then you get a degree, but
Yeah.
maybe you do it all your life,
Yeah.
but you're always doing it for the sake of
Yeah.
trying to reconnect with
Yeah.
something higher
Yeah.
and at the same time deeper.
Yeah. There's and hopefully, as Heidegger says, I seek to move you from confusion to being utterly perplexed. That sense of which this kind of gets back into just what we initially started talking about in the beginning of this dialogue is the sense of teacher student, right? Like I'm getting
Yeah,
after this whole dialogue, I'm really getting more of a sense of not the teacher delivering outcomes in which the teacher already has and the student doesn't have and students pay, but more of a sense of like it almost seems like the teacher's job, if you will, is to be more perplexed, right, than
yeah.
the students, right, and to draw help draw one into that
Well,
to that
it's it's
strangeness,
the
right?
it's the Socratic dictum, which is not just ironic. Oida uden eidos. He didn't really say this, but oida uden eidos is attributed to him. I know that I know nothing,
Yeah,
which is not ironic distance or detachment.
yeah.
Uh, it's
It's a way one part deeply participates, right? With
deeply participates with um, the learning. In a sense, I will encourage students, especially for this one, uh, to come in. I mean, look, when you when you read someone like Kant, I guess it's more difficult,
Mhm,
um, because it's already such a technical philosophy, and so at the same time so tremendously impactful on our world and our time. But with a thinker like Plato, who's so far away from us,
mhm.
um, it's almost easier to get closer to him
Yeah.
because he's so far.
So yeah,
So I will encourage students to come to this without any preconceived Wikipedia notions.
yeah,
It's already clear we don't know where this book is going.
yeah,
We don't
yeah,
know that he wants to erect the ideal city. We have no idea.
yeah, yeah,
Just this is where this dialogue is going. And
yeah,
it's going in all kinds of directions, by the way. It's
yeah,
going all over the place.
yeah,
And so you have to actively, in a sense, forget. You have
mhm,
to forget actively what you think you know,
mhm,
uh, to arrive where you know nothing.
mhm.
Read the text, converse with others, and then something can arise.
Yes,
And you don't know
start
yet
to
what that
remember.
is. You have
Yeah,
no idea what you and and this is the difficulty, of course. If someone strays away just completely, and it goes off into God knows, talk about aliens or something, maybe you'd have to bring them back.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
I mean, so some it goes off into this no man's land. That can happen.
mhm,
Um, into total aporia, right? Complete roadlessness. But if if the perplexity is a healthy one, because so while philosophy begins in this perplexity, it doesn't stop there. We're
Yeah.
not just constantly
Yeah.
perplexed. We do
Yeah.
need to get to where the forms actually begin to be sharp. So we do begin to see justice. We do
Yeah.
begin to see the good. And that seeing is the seeing of the inner eye. It
Yeah.
is the seeing of the intellect. It's nous that begins to see.
Yeah.
But as your nous, your mind begins to see, you begin to see it in the world. So
Yeah.
you also enact it in the world.
Yeah.
But this can only happen when you've actually seen that light. And
Yeah.
if you only quibble about the theory, then
Yeah.
you're basically back in the matrix.
Yeah.
Um, and it's never enacted in the world. This is why so often um, uh, academic teachers of philosophy perhaps don't take it seriously. There's nothing. It doesn't. It's not. Writing an essay should be transformative. It should change you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A dialogue should change you. You have a conversation that's philosophical,
Yeah.
um, and you walk away with, oh, this is now something as not everything, but something has changed. I've
Yeah.
seen something I hadn't seen before.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
therapy does also, right? If not, it's not therapy. It's just
Yeah.
there's nothing, that comes out of it. So
Yeah.
learning outcomes, right? So again, but you cannot give those learning outcomes.
Right. Right.
Like you cannot guarantee that someone will walk away seeing the good
Mhm.
in the world.
Mhm. Yeah.
No, how do you guarantee? You cannot guarantee it.
Yeah.
You can guarantee, and what you can guarantee is that someone might be able to regurgitate the theory. But what happens within someone is not up to them entirely, not up to you as a teacher entirely,
Mhm.
but is up to, um, well, in fact, opening oneself up to the possibility of not knowing
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
reality of not knowing, and then the possibility of maybe learning
Yeah.
through the experience that a text can give us.
Yeah. 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 Awesome.
Thank you, Guy.
Yeah. I'll have all the links to your course in the show notes,
Thank you, sir.
and we'll have you on again, and then we'll analyze the outcomes
Yeah.
of the course and see and
Yeah, let's do
okay.
the learning outcome session. We can do a mid one, in February, where I just
Okay,
report
good.
back on.
Good, on our way to certification. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and then see how they did in the end.
Yes. Yes. Oh, great talking with you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.